So Soratel available now with low bush blueberries on the label. In terms of supply, there's a very good supply of this product in the marketplace, and the ease of use being a liquid formulation, that EC formulated product. I would advise to speak to your retailer, ask them about pricing and what have you, and you may be surprised where things look. So switching gears into an insecticide, and an insecticide that you will more than likely recognized. It's been in the blueberry game for last year, definitely for SWD, but that product is Cormoran. Cormoran's an insecticide with two modes of action. It has group 4 acetamiprid. Acetamiprid, quite known in this marketplace. There's a couple other competitive products out there, especially for blueberry maggot control. And then it has the group 15 Evaluron. So it's a unique formulation. There isn't any other in the marketplace like it. The blueberry use patterns that are on the label, there's a lot of them here. I think the big ones for your market, without a doubt, are blueberry maggot and then SWD. The specifics of Cormoran, you get that Evaluron, and then you get that same concentration of the acetamiprid as you would get in the competitive products. Available in 2 times 10.08 liter jugs. It has a wide range of other uses available on the label. And in terms of supply, the supply of this product is really good. And with getting the same amount of acetamiprid in Cormoran versus some of the competitive products, it's worth the effort to evaluate the pricing. In some situations, you could say, buy the acetamiprid, get the Evaluron for free. So it's a strong pricing discretion product. An article that came out from the grower here last year, entomologist ranking Cormoran insecticide as top choice for fighting against SWD. Not sure if maybe you've seen that. Effective on adults and larvae. And that is what I have. Pretty simple, straightforward. I'm surprised I'm under 15 minutes. But we got lots of time for questions.
There we go. That's right, Gavin. I much appreciate your presentation.
Thanks.
So probably one of the questions I'll get things started with is some of the guys will use liquid fertilizers from time to time. Are your products all compatible with that to the best of your knowledge?
Well, I wouldn't be a chem rep if I didn't say do a jar test first.
Sure.
And then the second thing is call us. We got a large a data set of the common ones. Challenging things as of late is there's been so many micros come onto the market. It's hard for our back end to be testing them all. So
Sure.
Any of the commonplace ones, we can look them through the list and talk through it and discuss if there's any watchouts or not. Because pH, turbidity, there's a lot of other factors that can influence compatibility as well.
Do we have any?
The answer would be,
Sorry.
I guess the answer would be, let's talk.
No, 100%. Is there others on the sign in or on the meetings here right now that have some questions we can put to Gavin? Can't let him off this early, this easy.
Don't see any in the chat, but if anybody has one that they want to say, they can just unmute themselves and ask a question.
So the sprays that you talked about there in your presentation, is it just the 2 that are still not available quite yet this year, or is it just the 1?
Just the one. So that's the grass herbicide, Arrow All In. If I remember the dates correctly, last August, Nova Scotia blueberry growers submitted a minor use registration for the active ingredient clethodim to be used for fescue control. And we've been following, some of the PMRA work in the background, and it does look to be a Q1 early 2024 approval. So I did make a comment there about talking to your retailer, asking Tim and Sandra, how does supply look, even out that far, because this may be a situation where 10, 20, 30,000 acres opens up overnight, depending on the approval process. And if there's not a little bit of planning done ahead of time, there just may not be product out there.
Okay. No idea on the price point of it yet, though. But
Yes, I could speak to that for sure. Arrow All In has a use pattern 100 milliliters to 300 milliliters, depending on severity and type of grass. The work that Dr. Scott White's been doing on fescue has been high rate, but then also topping up the adjuvant. Just due to that plant, it is really a monster. It is something. But then, getting those dims into the weed by topping up that adjuvant, you just get more consistent effort. So even at that high rate, you're without a doubt going to be coming in under $20 an acre.
okay. All right, good. Thank you.
Yep.
That actually answered one of the questions in the chat box.
It's always difficult talking cost, of course, because you got retailers and growers on the phone and
Sure.
and stuff. But yeah, I think comfortably high rate.
Gavin, probably another question that's come up is, have you approached the two biggest buyers of blueberries down this way, that being Wyman's and Oxford Frozen Foods, to see if they're okay with Cormoran and Soratel being used on their recommended lists?
So to the best of my knowledge, Cormoran was on one of the large tenders.
Okay.
And did go down on a few acres last year for SWD control. To be honest, so much of this blueberry effort has happened in a short period of time.
Sure.
I'll be at the blueberry grower meetings at the end of March. So really hoping to dive into everything else. But from a maximum residue limit, MRL, export issue, in the case of Soratel, we have a proven registered active ingredient. There shouldn't be any hiccups or watchouts by using one versus the other.
No, that's very true. I just thought I'd quiz you up, because I know each year that's sometimes the challenge with some of these products is that it's just didn't make their list for one reason or another. They didn't know about it, or
Mm-hmm. In the case of Soratel, we got approval on the 17th, and we had missed the one large tender by 4 days.
yes.
So maybe it's worthwhile for them to relook at availability and pricing.
Don't see any other questions. Do you have any others, Chloe, that coming across your?
No, I don't see any, but if anybody wants to unmute themselves, feel free and ask a question.
Hi, guys, it's Sandra. Thanks, Gavin, very much. I'll have a few growers ask me, because you were so professional. Some growers wanted just to confirm what Soratel replacement was, but I'll just let them know. So Soratel would be a comparable product to Proline. So it would be our Septoria control and monolinea control in the crop year. And then Cormoran, of course, would be the two actives is basically your Acale, Aceta plus another active in it. So it would control your maggot, but then also it's great with the spotted wing control as well. So, but thank you.
Thanks for that, Sandra. Well, great. Oh, sorry, Terry.
Yeah, I don't see anything else. So if
Okay.
you have anything more you wanted to add, then we can, I guess, let you
Well,
off.
I will be in Truro March 31st. We'll have a booth. We'll have a lot of information on Cormorant, Sortel, and Arrow All In. But then, we can have some in-person talks about some of the other things we're working on, Tribenuron for one, through the R&D process as well. So
That's perfect. Now, we certainly thank you very much, Gavin. It was an excellent presentation and very timely with the products you've got there to offer. So we appreciate taking the time to present to us tonight.
I appreciate it too. Thanks, Truro.
Thanks.
Bye.
So, Chloe, do we have Cameron Menzies presentation?
I can get it up here.
Yeah, and I can bring it up on my screen and share it if you guys need to, whichever works.
Yep, if you want to share it, you can go right ahead.
Sure. Okay, just give me a sec here.
No rush. 5 minutes ahead of the game, so.
And you'll probably even be more ahead after I finish this. It's not too long of a presentation. It's probably what people want to hear though on a Monday evening. Okay, so first you guys can see me and hear me and everything okay?
Everything looks good, Cameron. I can just do a brief intro if you like.
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
And it will be brief because I honestly don't know you that well, but Cameron comes to us as the Berry Crop Development Officer and apiarist from the PEI Department of Agriculture. So I'll let you take it away and expand on that. How's that?
Yeah, that's about all you need to hear. I've only been at this about 5 years now, so I'm still learning as I go. But I'm happy to speak about some of the more important insect pests and wild blueberries in the maritime region here. So, I'm going to be focusing on really monitoring is probably the biggest one I'm going to be looking at. I'll talk a little bit about thresholds where there is information on that. And of course, we'll talk control options at the end of the presentation here. And I guess, just typically we'll do questions at the end of the presentation unless something pops up in the chat and maybe I can address it while I'm speaking here. So yeah, I wanted to start off the topic tonight by mentioning what integrated pest management is. I'm sure over the next 3 evenings, this is going to be brought up multiple times, but luckily I'm the first person to talk about it, so you're not sick of hearing it yet. If you don't know what integrated pest management or IPM is, it's really an approach to using all of the tools in a toolbox to deal with a pest, an insect pest, or even a disease, a fungal disease, or a weed. And that's why we call it a sustainable, or you can also call it a holistic approach. So that could be a biological control agent. There's nothing really applicable for insect pests and wild blueberries. But there are in various other crops. It could be a cultural control agent. For example, you are fostering a healthy disease-resistant crop. That is an example of cultural control. Or another one that I'll bring up a little bit later is timing your harvesting of your crop to reduce insect pressures. You could also use physical control methods like mechanical weeding, for example. That's one way to deal with weeds without actually using any herbicide products. And finally, the most important and most common one, especially in this crop, is chemical control, and that is herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides. So the foundation to an effective targeted chemical control is, you probably guessed it, monitoring. So knowing exactly what the pest pressures are in your fields, not just your region, is going to really allow you to use the best use of your time and money. And also something else, using weather data to predict the emergence of these pests with something called growing degree days. Now, I know this is going to be talked about a little bit further. I think tomorrow Hugh is going to talk on this, but I figured I'd just give you guys a couple slides on this right now. Again, I have the privilege of going first, so everything is fresh right now. All right, so growing degree days. What they are, it's a measure of heat accumulation based on the daily temperatures. So we use that to estimate the growth and development of plants and insects during the growing season, especially of the crop itself, actually. So I apologize here, I'm putting up a little bit of math here, but how that's calculated is really with these two formulas here. So we calculate the daily mean temperature by adding the max and minimum temperature and dividing that by 2. And then we calculate the daily growing degree days that are accumulating by subtracting a base temperature from this mean temperature. And the base temperature that we typically use is either 0 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees Celsius, or maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 degrees Celsius. I think that somebody left their mic on here and are not muted. If you're hearing this, I'm just getting a little bit of background noise here. It's not too bad, but I'll just continue on anyways here. So more about growing degree days. So for wild blueberries in Atlantic Canada, we typically begin counting these growing degree days on April 1st. That's when really the crop starts to wake up and maybe the insect pressures start to build up a little bit, or they start to develop. So an accumulation of growing degree days is really just the sum of the daily growing degree days starting from April 1st. And why are these growing degree days useful? Well, really it helps us predict the timing of important crop phenology stages. And what that means are the different stages that a crop will reach throughout a growing season. And it's very useful for growers to be able to time whether it's applications of the different chemical products or various other management strategies they have. So for example, here with wild blueberries, plant emergence in a sprout field starts at about 270 growing degree days. And that's very useful for growers to put on their herbicides, their early season herbicides. So instead of relying on a calendar date to put this application down, if you're able to count these growing degree days that are accumulating every single day, then you can make that extremely timely application of that first herbicide. Another really important one in the crop year, the fruiting year of wild blueberries, is that the bloom begins at about 390 growing degree days. And this is very useful for the timing of hive placement, honeybee hives. That first 5 to 25% of the bloom is really that sweet spot to get those hives on. So if you know or about when that bloom is going to start, if you're watching the growing degree days accumulate, then you can figure out exactly what day it is instead of, again, relying on the calendar day. But for what we're talking about tonight, or what I'm talking about, you can also use these growing degree days to predict the emergence of important insect pests. And again, that helps you save money. So with respect to insect development, many insects pests, they start their development once the soil temperature is above a minimum threshold, again, that T-base temperature. Most insects, actually, if you don't know, have some part of their life cycle in the soil. And every single one that I'm going to be talking about tonight, all of the important ones for wild blueberries, have part of their development in the soil, mostly in their pupal stage. So where 0 degrees Celsius for air temperature is useful as a T-base for wild blueberry crop phenology, because of course plants become active when it's not freezing anymore. 5 degrees Celsius to 10 degrees Celsius as a soil temperature is useful as a T-base for wild blueberry insect pest development. So every day that the mean soil temperature is above a specific temperature between 5 and 10 degrees Celsius, depending on the insect pest, these growing degree days begin to accumulate. For example, the University of Maine determined that when 971 growing degree days Fahrenheit transferred to 540 in Celsius are reached, the middle of the adult blueberry maggot fly population emergence is expected to occur. So again, we're not waiting for a specific day on the calendar to know when the middle of this blueberry maggot fly emergence is going to happen, when all the adults can start to show up. But we can use the actual accumulation of these growing degree days. Using models that take other factors into consideration, like soil moisture, we can predict when a certain number of growing degree days will have accumulated weeks in advance. So that means when we're tracking these growing degree days over time, we can sort of extrapolate, that curve that is starting maybe 7-10 days in advance to see when a certain amount of growing degree days are probably going to land on a calendar date. Unfortunately, the local soil temperature and moisture information, it's difficult to obtain. We have to have weather stations out there constantly measuring the temperature, and also soil probes in the ground constantly measuring the soil temperature in your local area to get these growing degree days, these predictive models. But fear not, because there are simple methods that every grower themselves can use without having to rely on these more expensive weather stations. And of course, that's monitoring for the pest itself. So I'm going to talk about 3 insects tonight, and then I'm going to talk about the monitoring for each of these 3 insects. The first of which, of course, is blueberry maggot. That is a major pest of both high bush and wild blueberries. It has been for a long time, and it probably will be for a long time. It's a native pest, so it has evolved kind of parallel here to its main host crop. It's really closely related to the apple maggot, which has specialized itself to apples. So the blueberry maggot begins to emerge from the soil as adult flies ahead of blueberry ripening. These sexually mature flies, they colonize fields beginning at the field margins, the field edges. And mated females lay 1 egg per ripe blueberry. And you can see the picture of these adult flies here. They have that really distinctive pattern on their wings. It's maybe in the shape of an F that helps people identify these maggot flies. Both the apple and blueberry maggot fly have that similar pattern there. But again, they are host specific. So if you see one of these flies in your blueberry field, it's probably not an apple maggot fly. It's probably the blueberry maggot fly that is going to be laying eggs in the wild blueberries. So after hatching, the larvae feed and grow for about 2 to 3 weeks. And the larvae exit the berries, and then they drop down into the soil to overwinter as pupae. So to monitor for this pest here, I got most of this information from the University of Maine here. It's a very, their cooperative extension website is very useful. Lots of great resources there. So I'm relying heavily on their information, but it's still quite practical for our region here up in Canada. So when these growing degree day models are not available, we can use reliable field monitoring tools to inform the crop protectant timing, or in conjunction with the growing degree day models if they are available. So yellow sticky pheromone traps can be purchased and placed at the field edges before the anticipated fly emergence occurs. So you kind of see a picture there in the bottom left. That's a diagram of the height of the placement of one of these yellow sticky traps. And there's a picture of it right there in a wild blueberry field. And once a certain number of flies appear on the traps, then a decision can be made about chemical treatment. A lot of you are probably wondering now, what is that certain number of flies? The answer is it depends. There's a complicated answer that I can maybe post in the chat that I can lift directly from the University of Maine Cooperative Extension website. But I don't want to say that that is the official number of flies that you would see on a trap before you would start treating. Of course, you know, the processors here in this region may have their own specific numbers. So if we want to get that specific number, then maybe I can either post that in the chat or email the group here a little bit later on with that. But regardless here, this is the monitoring tool to get that number. So we'll move on here to another really important insect pest in wild blueberries. And that, of course, is spotted ring Drosophila, or shortened to SWD. This is an invasive pest. It's actually native to Eastern Asia, but it has been established here in North America, I think since the late 2000s, if I recall correctly, and probably more recently here in the Maritime region. This is a polyphagous pest. That means, unlike the blueberry maggot, which is specialized to blueberries, it feeds on a variety of host plants. So this is an important pest here in Canada with many different fruit crops, high-bush blueberries, wild blueberries, strawberries, etc. It's not just wild blueberry growers who have to contend with this pest here. Another way that it differs from the blueberry maggot is that it can have multiple generations in a year in warm conditions. So this pest, it really, you have to be paying attention to what kind of summer you're having to know really what your pressures from SWD are going to be. So for instance, in a hot summer in this region, the life cycle from an egg to an adult can shorten to less than 10 days. And it is very dependent on the temperature outside. So again, it's very important to be monitoring it because you can't just rely on average data over a number of years. You need to know what kind of summer you're having this particular year to guess what your spotted wing pressures are going to be. Also, unlike the blueberry maggot, the females can lay multiple eggs per berry using what's called a serrated ovipositor. That's pictured there in that yellow circle. And also there's a close-up of a blueberry with distinctive stings that the SWD females will make into a blueberry to lay their eggs. And they are characteristic of this pest because they have that particular ovipositor, whereas the blueberry maggot does not have that serrated ovipositor. But mostly when you're going to be doing monitoring, you're going to be looking for the males because they are easily identifiable with the red eyes and dark spots on their wings. So there's a picture there in the top right corner. Circled in red there are those distinctive dark spots on their wings that the males have, but the females do not have. But the males and the females have those red eyes, as you can see there. So to monitor for this pest here, it's actually, you can buy a lot of these materials just probably at, your local party supply store, honestly. You're going to begin monitoring for this pest here when the green berries are just turning to pink, so before they're ripe. So don't wait until you're about to harvest to start monitoring for these. You need to start monitoring for them when the berries are green and they're about to turn pink. So you can monitor the adults with homemade traps. Really, you can use these red Solo cups, these plastic cups. And the solution in there, you can either use apple cider vinegar or a yeast sugar mixture to attract the adult flies. Now, research shows that the yeast and sugar mixture is a little more attractive to the flies, but it's a little harder to deal with. And of course, apple cider vinegar is just much more readily available. And then you're going to be drilling about 1/8 of an inch diameter holes along the top edge of the cup. You want to be drilling holes like this all along the top edge of the cup so that the flies can enter there. And you are going to hang these cups with the liquid in them, but using probably a garden stake, again, at the field edge. They come in from the field edge first when they emerge, and then they start to go into the center of the fields after they more adults are emerging. And that cup is going to be about chest height, maybe lower. Actually, you don't want it too high here, again, because obviously these insects, they are attracted to the crop itself, so you don't want it much higher than the crop. Action thresholds. So I can give you a simple answer on this one. Once one fly is captured in these cups, then treatment should begin. Unless you're going to be harvesting that crop immediately or within really 3 to 4 days after you capture that first fly. And just to kind of go back to my earlier slide, that is an example of cultural control. You're not using any insecticide once you trap one of those flies, but you monitor for it. And if you're able to respond by harvesting it immediately, then you can do that. But that's not very practical because a lot of times the crop itself is not going to be fully ripe. So you're probably going to have to rely on a chemical product, an insecticide, to take care of it. You can also monitor for the larvae using what's called a salt test. This is a little bit more complicated, but I'll just summarize it here. It involves collecting a bunch of ripe berries and placing them in a salt water solution in a plastic bag. Once you do that, the living spotted wing larvae will exit the fruit in this saltwater solution. And basically you strain the liquid to count for the larvae that have exited these berries. So that's more of a snapshot of what kind of infection do I have right now in my ripe berries. And this is useful in conjunction with the monitoring for adults that happens before the berries are ripe. And also larval monitoring is useful if it's conducted frequently, as this pest can be explosive in the late summer buildup in a field, especially if a heat wave kind of comes in late summer. You know, the population of spotted wing here, it's not necessarily going to be static. Since they can have those multiple generations per year, they can really respond to a heat wave that comes in and their populations can really take off. So getting that snapshot throughout the period where your crop is ripe may be useful. And finally, I'll talk about a third one that really doesn't get talked about enough, but I was asked to talk about it tonight, and I agree that that's a good idea because we're probably going to start talking about this one a little bit more with respect to wild blueberries. And this is the cranberry fruitworm. So as the name suggests, it's a traditional pest of cranberries in this region, but it's also a pest of high bush blueberries in regions across North America where high bush blueberries are grown. But more recently, it's possible that there is an increasing prevalence in wild blueberries. I heard that it was first discovered when it was being monitored for in a maritime wild blueberry field in 2019. So that's quite recent. Whether or not this pest has been infesting wild blueberries all along, I'm not really sure, but the official record that I have heard goes back only to 2019. So how this pest, how its life cycle carries out is, again, the adults emerge from the soil but this time it's during bloom to begin their mating. And the mated females lay eggs directly on small green fruit just after the bloom finished. And you can identify these, you know, they are a lepidopteran. That means they're a moth. So their larvae looks a lot different from the last two insects I showed you, which were both dipterans, flies. So their larval body color is a reddish yellow on top and a green below, but it's also, when it's at its full size, it's going to be significantly larger than the blueberry maggot larvae or the spotted wing larvae, which is quite small. And it's kind of hard to see there, but you can see those larvae for the cranberry fruitworm there, and those are blueberries, that the high bush blueberries that they infested in the corners of that picture, just as a bit of a size reference. And then the two pictures to the left, those are adults, and again they're moths, and they don't look really distinct from a lot of other moths, to be honest, but the front wings of these moths are brown with white scales. And the wingspan is only 3/4 of an inch. So this is a relatively small moth here. To monitor for this pest here, you can actually purchase pheromone baited lures that are specific for fruitworms actually. And Great Lakes IPM, that's a company that sells these two products here that I'm picturing. If you wanted to look those up, there's also the product names there. And you will place these and near the field edges. Again, that's where they come first before they infest the center of the fields. And you're going to place these out there actually during bloom. So that's a little bit earlier than the spotted wing monitoring when you put those cups out after bloom when the berries are green turning to pink. You want to have these out there during bloom because these adult moths emerge earlier than the spotted wing. You can also, just like with spotted wing Drosophila, you can monitor for the larvae, for the presence of larvae when the berries are ripening after the presence of the adults were confirmed with lures. You won't be using a salt test to do that, to my knowledge. I think that's just going to be kind of crushing berries up, but I'm not really sure if that salt test would work. I can confirm that later on, but regardless here, you can monitor for the larvae themselves as well. So to my knowledge, there's no treatment threshold specifically established yet for wild blueberries. Again, this is a possibly emerging pest here. But what I do know from my conversations are that economically significant damage can occur if you are monitoring for the pest and it does show up on these traps and you don't treat for it. So whereas we don't really know exactly how many adult moths you need to have on those traps before it makes sense to treat for them, we do know that people who have this pest in their fields, their wild blueberry fields here in the Maritimes, that don't treat for it can sustain economically significant damage. So my very last slide here, please forgive me, there's a lot of information on this, but this is pulled either from the labels of these chemical products themselves or the very handy pest management calendar tools from Perennia Food and Agriculture. I really got to tip my hat to them for doing a lot of this work, the heavy lifting beforehand. And I'll also say here that, you know, these are not the only products that are registered for these various pests here. If you go to Perennia Food and Agriculture's website and you go to the wild blueberry section and you look for their pest management calendar here, you will see every product that is registered in Canada for a particular pest for wild blueberries. But what I included here are in my conversations with the farm managers for the two major processors here in the Maritimes. That's Oxford Frozen Foods or Bright Lumber Company and Wyman's. These are the typical ones that are used in a spray schedule, but again, they're not the only ones. I mean, we heard about a new product in this last presentation, Cormoran, which has one of the active ingredients that is the active ingredient for a sale. But again, I just want to keep it simple enough and show you what are typical products that are used for these pests. So for the blueberry maggots, one that's commonly used is the sail. And again, that's the active ingredient. That's one of the active ingredients in Cormoran there. And when you look at the label, it tells you to apply within 7 days of the first adult capture. So again, you have to be monitoring for blueberry maggot to know the proper timing of this product. And you can only do a maximum of 4 applications per season and not more than one, do not apply more than once every 12 days. Spotted wing Drosophila, on the other hand, imidan, or the active ingredient is Fosmet. That's a more common product that's used for that pest. And the label says that you can do 1 or 2 applications per season, depending on the severity of infestation. And again, you're going to need to know what the severity of infestation is by monitoring for this, especially by doing a combination of the adult and larval monitoring. And then finally, that third pest, the emerging cranberry fruitworm, Intrepid. That's the brand name there, Intrepid 240. This is what I've been told is recommended to use for this pest. And on the label, you can apply it at the beginning of egg hatch. And you can repeat applications every 7 to 14 days if required, based on population monitoring. Again, to know how many times you use this thing, you got to be monitoring for it. You can't just guess it. And I was actually talking with the farm manager for Wyman's, and they recommend doing a tank mix with the fungicide Septoria. And they do this, he told me, right after the bees come out. So not during bloom. You don't want to be spraying these products during bloom. And in fact, that would be going against the label if you were to do that. But again, remember, for the cranberry fruitworm, this is a little bit of an earlier pest compared to spotted wing Drosophila, for example. So getting that product on right after the bloom and treating it for septoria is apparently a good way to do it. So that's it for my presentation here. We can field some questions now.
Thanks, Cameron. That's very much appreciated and timely with the growing degree days, because we'll actually have Hugh Liu talking here later this week with regards to the weather stations and growing degree dates. They've spent a fair bit of time trying to expand that. So that was great. You brought that up.
No problem.
Does anybody have any questions for Cameron? You can unmute yourself to present your question.
I do, Terry.
Go for it.
Hey, Cameron, thanks a lot for that presentation. Nice to see those little tricks with using the red solo cup. It's always nice to get an additional use for a red solo cup, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So a question I have, just seeing that. So I'm wondering if the timing of SWD and cranberry fruitworm, if you could accomplish, an application of Cormoran for both of those pests at the same time. Like, do they overlap well enough?
That's an interesting question. I'm a little bit hesitant to say yes, just because I was told that right when those honeybees come out of the field, so right when the bloom ends, that's when they want to be treating for cranberry fruitworm. And that's before they really get an idea of what the spotted wing pressures in a field are going to be. But it's possible that they could do a double application there. I think I remember you mentioned in your presentation that it's registered for both of those. So if you like, I could talk to those farm managers again, who oversee the spray schedules, and see if that makes sense. But just from my own estimation here, the two pests might not overlap enough to make it work. But I will I'll follow through on that for you, and then maybe I can email the group here, and that can be that information can be sent out.
Thanks, and I'll look in the background on my end, see if we have any data to suggest anything. And next time I'm on the island, I'll
maybe it would make sense on a really hot summer where it gets hot real early. Those spotted wing emergences might be happening earlier than normal. But yeah, I'm not too sure on a regular year.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Cameron? There was one in the chat section there, Cameron.
Oh, yes.
Want to elaborate a little on that or not?
Yeah, sorry, I saw that. Was that about T-base? Somebody was asking about the.
Yeah, what's the T-base on those numbers?
Okay, so if I'm understanding that correctly, somebody's asking if they're asking what that is. That's the base temperature that you would choose to use in your growing degree day calculations. So maybe I'll just go back to that slide here. Might be a little bit easier. Get a better sense.
Right there.
I'll go, well, or maybe I'll go a little bit further back here. So we have these two formulas that we use to calculate growing degree days. First is calculating the mean temperature, the daily mean temperature, and then to calculate the daily growing degree days that are accumulating, you subtract a base temperature from this mean temperature. And you are going to want to choose that base temperature based on what you're most interested in. So if you're trying to figure out the timing of the crop phenology, so when the crop is going to emerge in a sprout field, when it's going to bloom, when tip dieback is going to occur, you're probably going to use 0 degrees Celsius, 0 degrees Celsius as your base temperature, because the crop itself starts to develop after when it's not freezing anymore. But insects themselves, they don't really start to develop in the soil until the soil is a little bit warmer than just the freezing temperature. And when you're selecting a base temperature, it has to be specific to the insect pest you're talking about. But from what I've looked is that those specific base temperatures are usually between 5 and 10 degrees Celsius. I hope that answers it a little bit better.
Should. Is there any other questions for Gavin or for Cameron? Sorry.
Harry, it's Sandra. More of a comment than anything, just for growers. When Cameron listed the insecticides at the last page there, Fosmet or Imidan, PMRA has been reevaluating that chemistry for a few years. And
Right, yeah.
yeah, and just to let growers know that it's really being restricted on some of the usages and the re-entries and the levels of application that I feel like for the blueberry industry, it is becoming a limited use chemistry that the European market basically doesn't want it on any small fruit product. So going forward, we're just going to have to watch what insecticides we are using and to check with your processor or purchases of berries just to make sure that you can use what you're able to use on insects. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. That is a really good point. I listed it there because just from my conversations, it's what I think is currently the standard for use with spotted wing Drosophila. But again, there are multiple products that are registered for this. And, maybe we will have to switch to a different product as the standard, depending on what the markets are dictating.
For sure.
And I just have one quick question, just a personal question, I guess. Do you know if there's any like winter temperatures that affect any of these 3 pests that could actually possibly knock the population down for the next season?
That is a good question.
Yeah, if they're so like manipulated by the warm weather, if the cold weather also has an effect on them.
I'm gonna guess yes. I've heard of that several times before. Some other crops like with apples, codling moth. If you have a very severe winter and the soil temperatures are very cold for a sustained period of time, you will have more of those pupae in the soil die. And I believe that's the same for spotted wing Drosophila too. If you have a very cold winter, then more of those pupae are going to die in the soil. I just don't know exactly what those temperatures are off the top of my head. But yeah, just as the summer temperatures influence the population buildup, I do believe that how severely cold a winter is will also limit how many of these things can emerge from the soil when the ground thaws. I can try to get those exact numbers because a lot of research has been done on these pests and I'm sure it exists.
That would be great.
Sure.
I don't see any other questions, so barring none, then I'll thank you very much, Cameron, for your presentation. It was much appreciated. Oh, there's one more.
Maybe.
Jeff, just put a.
Yeah, that's a very good point here. So, a lot of these products are, of course, they affect non-target organisms, especially pollinators. So the very first thing that you will do is follow the label, which is going to tell you that you cannot apply these products during bloom. That's when the actual, native bees and commercial honeybees are going to be directly on the crop. And also adhering to the maximum wind speeds, so to minimize drift like that. But, there is other research out there that suggests, sublethal accumulations of some of these products may in fact have impacts on some of these bees. But really the easy answer I'm going to give you right now is that if you follow the label, then that's going to reduce the exposure to these non-target organisms as greatly as possible. That needs to be taken into consideration. But could I tell you that the risk is going to be eliminated 100%? Probably not, but you just have to be smart about the timing and follow that label.
Very true. think that was the last question under the
Yeah,
wire.
and I'll elaborate on that a little bit. I mean, you know, a lot of testing, field testing is done with these products to see what the impact on non-target organisms will be. The formulations are designed to minimize that impact. Is it perfect? No, but a lot of it is up to how the actual producer is going to be applying it, and following the label again is going to reduce that risk.
No, that's perfect. Thank you very much, Cameron. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. I guess I'll stop sharing the screen here.
All right, sounds great.
All right. Wait, do I do that or do you guys do that?
I think if you go up to the top, there should be a button that says stop sharing.
Yeah, or there's a pause share. Yeah. Okay.
And Scott, are you online?
Yes, I am, Terry.
Awesome.
I'm still viewing Cameron's screen though on my computer, so I don't think the share stopped, or maybe it did.
I still see it as well.
Okay, yeah, because I just had a button that said pause share.
Okay,
Oh,
I think
wait. Oh, there it is.
there you go.
No, you'd think I'd know how to do this by now, eh? Still
No,
learning.
that's okay. No problems at all.
Harry, can I just interject for 1 second before Scott gets
Yes,
started?
please do.
Just a reminder to everyone, if your Zoom name is not your full name, we're not going to be able to record you for pesticide points. So please let us know what your full name is if you are on Zoom right now, if it's not showing that way, so we can get you recorded.
And I should also mention, if there is any Newfoundland viewers on, you are going to get pesticide points. We got approval here just the other day. So whatever you saw there for point allotment, your government has approved it as well. So again, if we don't have your pesticide name and number tied together, we need to know those if you want to get your points, because we'll be submitting the sheets to your government probably sometime next week. So. All right, Scott, are you ready to go?
Yeah, you're just seeing the standard slide view, I hope,
Yeah,
Terry.
no,
Yeah.
everything looks perfect from this end. So
Yeah, okay,
I
good,
guess I
good.
won't type any more of your time. I'll allow you to do your own
Oh,
introduction.
you can talk all night if you want, Terry.
No, that's okay. They come to hear you, not me.
No, well, thank you very much, Terry, and good evening, everyone. That's good to be here. So tonight, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, just quickly, a brief product update. When Terry first approached me about this meeting, our hope was that we'd be getting everyone primed to kind of roll out clethodim and so Arrow and other products, and unfortunately it's just not to be for this year. But you do have Prism, which I'll mention briefly, and then I just wanted to update everyone on some changes in the PMRA stance on tank mixes and how that might affect us over the next couple of years if we don't look at getting some language changed on labels. And then we'll get down to business talking about weed management. But as we're coming into this year, I do want to kind of stress that we're kind of in a holding pattern when it comes to weed control products and things. So there's not really much new for you to use going into this year. So I'll just be kind of reiterating some things, and at any time during the presentation, happy to answer questions as I'm going along here. Okay, so just again, a quick registration update. As Gavin already mentioned, the Arrow products and things aren't going to come through for this year, but as he mentioned, it's still good news because they are going to come through and be very useful for you guys. It just unfortunately won't be for this year. And then Steadfast, I mentioned in the fall, is going to be delayed until next year as well. But Prism is out, and I don't know if Terry and Sandra and them have any in stock or not, but this is the product that you do have access to for this year. And basically, my advice on this product would be to use it anywhere that you would normally have used Altum in the past. So if you had some fescue and you wanted to use option and you would prefer to use an option in Altum as you have in the past, this year you could add Prism to the option, and you could throw it in with Velpar or something like that, where again, you would have traditionally used Altum in the past. So I don't think it's going to be a product that anyone's going to use this product alone for anything. It's going to be in mixture with some other products there. Okay. And then speaking of mixtures, things are going to, unfortunately, things are going to start getting a little dicey when it comes to tank mixes. So this is the new PMRA thing that they have released on tank mixes. And I just kind of happened upon this because I was on an unrelated call and there was some PMRA guys on it, and they said, if asked if I had heard about it, and I didn't, because I don't pay attention to that stuff or whatever. But they mentioned that if they did send me the document, and they said to start including it in presentations or whatever, just to start the dialogue around this, because these guidelines are going to kind of roll in over the next 2 years, is my understanding. And so nothing really changes for 2 years, but if things do change, according to this, it really restricts what you can and cannot use for tank mixes. Okay, so I just wanted to make everyone aware of this quickly tonight. So under those, and this is my interpretation, I want to stress, this is my interpretation of this stuff. And as more people read it and interpret it, the view on it may evolve here. Okay, I do want to stress that. But basically, it kind of comes down, the new guidelines will come down to about 4 label stances on tank mixes. So you can have a label that will have a general statement regarding tank mixes. Callisto is a good example. If you look at that label closely, it has a general statement that says you can tank mix this herbicide with other products to improve grass control, to improve broadleaf control, and so on. It has a nice general statement that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of choosing potential tank mix partners with that herbicide. Okay. Below that, things get more restrictive. So on some labels, you will have a label that only provides specific tank mix recommendations, but they provide that without what's called an exclusionary statement. So the label will say you can tank mix this herbicide with products X, Y, Z, etc., and they leave it at that, and that's what they provide. And then some other labels take that a step further by providing recommended tank mixes. So they'll give you specific tank mixes with a follow-up statement that says you cannot tank mix this herbicide with any products that are not included on this label. So that's what I mean by an exclusionary statement. They say you can tank mix it with anything you see on this label, but anything that's not on this label, you're not allowed to tank mix it with according to the label, or you're technically off label, which is not good. And then a label can be silent on tank mixing, and that's when they don't mention anything about tank mixing in any of the crops. Okay. Now, this is where some of our common, or some of your guys' common herbicides tend to fall into in terms of these categories. And again, this is my interpretation of the labels, but the most flexible labels that you have right now is Callisto, and then the generic Callisto product, which is Mester. Chiquera, the statement on there is pretty flexible. And then Spartans is a little bit vague, to be honest, but I interpret it as being fairly flexible when I look at it. And then Authority, both formulations of Chateau and Sinbar, they recommend specific tank mixes. And then these ones here, the next category down, are the ones that provide recommended tank mixes, but also include the exclusionary statement to tell you that you cannot tank mix these products with anything that is not on that label. Okay. And there's a few popular ones in this category here. Now, the superscripts, the A, most of their Corteva labels will indicate that you can just give them a call if you have a question, which may provide some flexibility. An option may only fall into this category in Manitoba. I'm not 100% sure. And the fact that I have uncertainty in the first place is one of the things that the PMRA is trying to overcome with this, is move to standardized language, okay? But the reality is depending on where your products lie, this dictates what you can tank mix with. And so as of right now, according to our labels, okay, anything that has a general statement can be tank mixed with other products that have a general statement, but cannot be tank mixed with any of these other products unless these products specifically have these products on the label. So if you have something like Ignite, for example, and it has recommended tank mixes, but doesn't have Chikara, for example, as a recommended tank mix, then you can't tank mix it with Chikara technically, because Chikara has a general statement, but Ignite is the more restrictive label, and therefore you wouldn't theoretically be allowed to tank mix it, okay? Now, unfortunately, these are the blueberry products that are currently on these labels when it comes to tank mixes that you're allowed to do. Okay, and you'll notice the word none is there a lot. And then whenever you do have products there, the list is not very extensive at all. Okay, and so if you kind of look at, for example, Ignite, it has the exclusionary statement, and the only two blueberry herbicides that are on that label as recommended tank mixes are Velpar and Sinpar. Which technically means that all of the use of Ignite Chateau is off label. It's not a recommended tank mix. 90% of what I recommend is not allowed under these new guidelines. And when you look at allowable tank mix partners here, it's just dismal in terms of what you're technically allowed to do with these guidelines. Okay, and so most of the more useful product tank mixes that are used in blueberries would basically be prohibited under some of these new guidelines. Okay, and so the main reason that I'm mentioning this is it's kind of time, and I think Hugh's on the label from Perennia there and things, and it's just time to start, you know, if you get a chance to chat with a product rep or something like that, it's just time to open up the dialogue to get a final stance on where companies and products stand when it comes to tank mixes, because my understanding is that over the next 2 years, this is going to kind of be rolled out, and 2 years from now, if our labels still reflect what you see in this table, then none of the tank mixes that you rely on are going to be really technically be allowed. Okay. And it applies when you tank mix fungicides with the herbicides and insecticides and all that stuff as well. So it's potentially very restrictive, but it's certainly not meant to put anybody in panic mode. And it's not changing what I recommend for the next couple of years. But it's just meant to open up, let you know that this is in the works and is brewing. And that you guys may, as a grower association, whether it's through the office in Dept with extension specialists like you, start compiling lists of important tank mixes and identifying labels where we may have to look at potentially getting tank mixes added or getting some language change or whatever. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on that right now?
Hey, Scott, it's Gavin.
Yeah.
Just to comment on all of that, we're following that in the background as well. And when you look at crop protection for the main cash crops, if this comes to fruition, it's going to be an absolute mess.
Oh yeah, it's not just blueberries, it's everybody.
Yeah, so you know, I'm optimistic that smarter heads will get together and prevail. And then maybe a little bit, of course, with the production companies of, you know, having a few more statements on the label, but I'm not all doom and gloom yet. I'm always optimistic.
Oh yeah, I'm not either. I'm not trying to paint that I am.
Yep.
Just that you know, it's just another thing to deal with.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks. I knew there was going to be some product reps on, so I was a little nervous about presenting this stuff. But that's my general interpretation of this is a table that they have in their document to basically tell you if you can tank mix something together or not. And as Gavin mentioned, you know, it's hopefully cooler heads will prevail, and hopefully this won't be an issue. But I just wanted you to be aware that we're not sitting pretty in terms of flexibility with tank mixes if some of the restrictive aspects of this become reality. Okay, now when it comes to weeds, I'll move into that now, and I just wanted to start with fescue because it'll certainly be one that'll be on the radar going into the spring. So just a quick review of the basic biology of this grass. So the hair fescue, it is a cool season grass, and so it requires vernalization or a cold period, basically winter, to be able to flower in the following spring. So when the clumps of grass come out of winter, they're vegetative. They bolt and flower very, very quickly. So they tend to bolt very early in the spring, and by early summer, they'll be in flower. And then as you move into late summer and into the fall, the clumps of grass that flower are going to be producing seeds, and those seeds are going to be falling down onto the ground. And then the plants are going to revert to a vegetative state to go through winter again. And then that just repeats across both the sprout year and the crop year, unless you intervene and try to stop that. Okay. Now the seeds of this grass don't have any dormancy. And so the seeds that fescue produces is basically the same as if you buy a bag of lawn seed and dump it on the ground. Most of it's going to germinate and sprout right away. You don't have to put it in the fridge for 8 months to get them to sprout or anything. They're readily germinable, is what I'm saying. And so because of that, seedlings of this grass tend to pop up around 4 times during a typical 2-year blueberry production cycle. So if the clumps of grass go to seed in a given year, when those seeds land on the ground in late summer and fall, you will generally get hundreds, if not thousands, of seedlings coming up around the established clumps of grass each fall after these plants go to seed. And then any seeds that are left at the end of the sprout year will go through winter, and they'll germinate in the following spring of the crop year. And it's the same thing when you come around to the sprout year. Any seeds left on the ground at the end of the crop year that don't germinate tend to germinate the following spring. Okay, and because of this is why this grass can be so aggressive and why it can so rapidly overtake a blueberry field, is because every seed that it produces, as long as they're viable, they're not all viable, but every seed that it produces is either going to die or become a seedling in a very short period of time. And so if you look at this image here, you can see a bit of fescue here in the foreground. There's some of it scattered over there. You know, in a very, very short period of time, a blueberry field will go from looking like this to looking something like this, right? And it does happen very quickly. I know there's some folks on the call tonight that I've been talking to the last few weeks that literally have said they've watched this grass go from being 10% of their field to 30 to 50 to 60% over a very short period of time. And that's because when it goes to seed, it rapidly recruits new plants from the seed bank, and then it forms these sods very, very quickly. Okay, and so rightfully so, we've been coming at this grass fairly aggressively, and we were on the cusp this year of putting the whole puzzle together. If clethodim had to come through, then the grand design would have finally fallen into place or whatever. But unfortunately, that's not the case. But you still do have a lot of products available for this grass now, and certainly many more than have traditionally been available. So if you're coming into the sprout year this year, and you've got a field that's got fescue in it, I just have a few comments here. Basically, to me, what you do this spring will depend on whether or not you're using curb this fall. So if you've got a sprout year field that's got more fescue than you're comfortable with, and you've already got the curb purchased and you're planning to treat that field with curb this fall, then you want to do the cheapest possible thing this spring to knock that fescue back with minimal investment to get you to the fall sprout year, so you can put the curb back out. Okay, and so the cheapest thing that you can do that will have efficacy to me would be to apply options. So if you've got a sprout year field, it's got fescue, you're going to treat it with curb this fall, then I would just treat that with option this spring. It's the cheapest thing you can do to get you through the sprout year. And if you wanted to, you could tank mix prism with it to potentially get a boost in control. Okay. Hey, you could consider Sinbar, but as I've mentioned in many presentations, Sinbar is so variable on this grass now. And then the price of it is so high now as well. I don't like recommending it too much anymore because of the cost and the variability. But what I would say is I do know a handful of growers that are getting incredible mileage out of a Velpar Sinbar mix, including on fescue and on some of their ground. So if you're going to use Sinbar, you need to know your own fields, your own field history, and its history of performance on your ground. And if you've had good luck with it, the results from it can be quite good when it works. It's just that $200 an acre or whatever it is now. It works great when it works. Is not really good enough given that price. Okay. Hey, and if you're not going to use curb this fall, and you got some fescue that you're looking to try to knock back as best as you can, then that's where I would consider the Chikara or the Chikara and Ignite going into the spring. So just show some data on that from last summer. So these are some data combined across 3 sites at Greenfield, Stellarton, and Collingwood. You see the dates when they were applied last summer. This is the starting density of the fescue here, around 50 clumps of grass per square meter on average across sites. And then this is the fall of the sprout year, so say 7 months later or whatever. So in the control plots, you can see it's up to about 100 clumps of grass per square meter. And then where the full rate at Chikara and the full rate of Ignite went out here, that's what I would use. If you can't see my mouse cursor, then it's the bottom bar is what I'm recommending there, because even though it didn't provide 100% control, nothing does except curb is the reality with this grass most of the time, but it still gave about a 70% reduction in density of that grass, which is pretty good for a product that isn't curb. And that's what when this tank mix packs a good punch, that's generally what I'm seeing is around a 70-75% reduction in overall fescue growth. Okay, so these are just some images from last year. So this was at the site in Stellarton. You can see the control plot here versus the Chikara and Ignite here. So, there's still some fescue there, but you can also see a lot of the dead brown fescue that was thinned out and was killed in that plot. And that was pretty consistent across most of the blocks or whatever. And so, if you got these kind of results in a sprout field, in a perfect world, you would have clethodim to potentially knock it back with the following crop year or something. And the next crop year, 2024, you should have it, hopefully. So I still think it's a pretty good sprout year treatment, even though we did see some variability with it this past year, but I'll comment on that here in a moment. Okay, and then this is just out in Greenfield. So control plot, the Chikara alone, which I really wouldn't use it on its own too often, because I do think it does need the Ignite with it to really pack the killing blow on the fescue. I think it's a little too weak on its own, unfortunately, but it's not too bad, but there's a big difference when you mix it with Ignite. Okay, now Terry mentioned that there have been quite a few comments on tank mixes with Chikara and with Ignite. I haven't done any Chikara, Ignite, and Velpar tank mixes, so those 3 products in a mix, and I haven't done Chikara, Ignite, and Sinbar tank mixes. I haven't had a chance to try any of those yet. I'm kind of working my way towards them, but I have had Velpar and Ignite and Sinbar and Ignite out in many trials. No issues on the blueberries, generally a good treatment. And I've had Chikara and Velpar and Chikara and Sinbar out, and it's worked well. And then I've obviously had Chikara and Ignite out in many trials as well, and never had anything of concern to me in any of those trials. The blueberries look good, and the weed control is variable depending on the mix, but generally pretty decent on the fescue as well. And in the fall, I have tried the Chikara Ignite Chateau mix, which I did find was a little bit hot in some spots, but it was variable across site. So this was just one plot in a low area in a field where it looked like it did thin you can see it smoked the fescue, but it did seem like it potentially thinned the blueberries out. But to be honest, that's an early sprout year picture. By the time the cycle went on, you couldn't even tell any difference there, to be honest. So, if you were, looking to maybe consider Chikara and Ignite, and you wanted to have Velpar in there to get a little bit more weed control, because most folks are realizing if you're using Jacera that, it does have weaknesses. Some other weeds will get through, and it may potentially require a little bit of help in certain fields. I don't see any issue. A Valpar Jacera Ignite tank mix doesn't make me flinch at all. I think it'd be a decent tank mix, to be honest. Or you could just follow it up with Callisto or Venture or something as well. Okay. Now, just remember things like Jacera and Ignite in particular. These are very sensitive to environmental conditions. So any herbicide that you're applying to foliage of plants, a myriad of things can potentially reduce that efficacy. And all of that stuff is magnified a millionfold when you're dealing with fescue, because you're trying to hit basically a hair with a spray droplet when it comes to fescue, right? Because the leaves are so fine. So that presents a very unique challenge with fescue, to be honest. So just remember these things, when you are using these products or this tank mix on fescue, that the bigger the fescue is, the worse the results are going to be. And if you've got clumps of grass that are as big as the one in the top right corner there, that's a 600 ml Gatorade bottle. At that point, you got two options. You can either give up or you can apply curb, unfortunately, because this grass, the clumps of this grass, when they get that large, and they do within a matter of a few years or so, no herbicide is really going to kill something like that. I mean, you got way too many growing points and stuff, and curb would be the best bet there. But if you have more moderate, smaller size clumps of grass, then you're going to see much better control with some of the weaker products like Jacera Ignite relative to curb or whatever. Okay. This mix is sensitive to some environmental conditions, particularly drought stress and low humidity, which I think were the big factors affecting it last year, because it was very hot, it was very dry. And I showed a graph in the fall where the humidity just plummeted right in the spray time for fescue, as if God himself said, you got a new treatment this year. I'm going to step in and make sure you don't have good luck with it myself, is what it really seemed like, or whatever. But those are going to affect, they're going to affect the performance of these. And don't spray this mix on wet weeds. So if you're used to doing morning sprays, in the fall in particular, and sometimes in the spring, if there's dew on the plants, then all your spray is going to do is add to that already existing water on the leaves, and it's all going to accumulate and wash off. Wait till the plant's dry. It's mainly a problem in the fall, same as cold temperatures there. Okay, there is a very interesting characteristic associated with Ignite that a lot of folks don't know, is that if you apply it in early morning or at night, efficacy of this herbicide drops by anywhere from 10 to 20%. And that's due to a circadian rhythm expression of an enzyme that is affected by Ignite in plants. And therefore you want to be spraying this mix in the daytime, preferably between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. or something like that. But you just don't want to be doing any night spraying with it or early in the morning. You want to make sure the plants have had some daylight on them, and that photosynthesis in particular has kicked in and the plants are physiologically active. That's when you're going to get much more bang for your buck from this tank mix. Okay. And do remember your sprayer settings. Okay. It doesn't matter if you deliver the product on the field and get it sprayed if it's not delivered to the target properly. And if you're using low drift nozzles or drift guard nozzles, that can exacerbate the problem, because you really need good coverage on something like fescue. And so you want to try to aim for a medium spray droplet if you can, which on most of the commercial sprayers, if you're using like the Hypro nozzles, for example, say 12002s or something, you need to get that up to about 60 psi, maybe even 70 psi, but that's not hard to do on most of the commercial sprayers. It's a lot harder to do on a small plot treatment, but you guys should be able to handle that. And then you want to be going with at least 20 or so US gallons per acre to make sure you got a good water volume there as well. Okay, so don't skimp on the water to get done spraying faster when it comes to fescue. You're much better off taking an extra few hours to finish a spray job and actually have it work than finish up early to catch a beer or something and then not have it work. Okay, it's worth the extra a bit of time when it comes to fescue, because it's not a very forgiving weed. If you spray with a coarse spray that doesn't give good coverage, fescue is going to love you for that, and it's going to grow out of any injury that you get very, very easily. Okay. That was a lot of info. Does anyone have any questions on maybe trying to deal with fescue this coming sprout year? Okay, I'm going to take everybody's good. Obviously, if you're going into the crop year, I got nothing for you until the fall, right? Because clethodim would have stepped in there, would have been a perfect opportunity for arrow to shine, for example. But unfortunately, there's not much, there's nothing you can do there, to be quite honest. And so it'll just be, if it's a crop year field, you're back to just the standard, go in in the fall and use one of these products that I've got up here on the screen. Any of them will help, but if the field's really bad, and I think at this point, most folks that have experience with this grass, you kind of know in your heart when you look at a field whether or not it needs curb or not. I think you can know, and if it is that bad, as hard as that the cost of curb can be to swallow, anything else you apply is a waste of money, and so you're pissing money away on weaker chemistries or weaker products, really. So if it's bad, curb's what's going to get you back into farming mode on that land, and nothing else is going to rival that product in terms of efficacy on that grass. Okay, now the other species of fescue that is floating around and causing few people some headaches is red fescue. So I just wanted to mention this. It was only in about 8% of the fields that we surveyed in the recent weed survey. It's a very different looking fescue species. It spreads by rhizomes. So the lower left corner, you can see a clump of this that was dug up by a grower, and you can see the rhizome there in the lower part of the image. And you can see the picture behind the rhizome image here. You can see the red fescue. It's a very shiny, wavy grass. So if you've got a lot of it in a field in the summertime when it's fully outgrown, it's going to be waving in the wind, almost like waves or whatever. And it's a very, very shiny, very, very glossy grass. And on the right, you can see some images of what the individual shoots or ramets of it will actually look like. And you get a really dark, sort of a reddish brown sheath at the base of the plant. There's a seed head. It kind of looks like a bit like a bird feathers, panicle or whatever. And then it's got a really, really small membranous ligule at the collar region that you'll barely even be able to see, to be honest. But basically, based on what I've been hearing over the last couple of years, if you spray your field with, say, Valpar and Sinbar, and then you go back in with Callisto and Venture, or have any other control strategy in which you would expect very, very good grass control, and you still have a certain species of grass hanging around there, based on what's happened over the last couple of years, there's a pretty good chance that it might be this species. And so if you've done what you think should be a good grass control program in the field, and there's still a species of grass in there that seems to be doing just fine, then you should dig some of that up and try to get it identified. You can send me images, you can send some images to Hugh or whoever. You should try to get it identified, because if it is this red fescue, it spreads by rhizomes and becomes dug in like a tick very, very quickly within a field. And it's worse than the other fescue because it's got the rhizomes below ground, which makes it a lot more stubborn and actually harder to kill. And so you it's one of those ones that, if the sooner you can be aware of it and make plans to deal with it, the better. Okay. Hey, and this is kind of what it looks like throughout the summer. It just kind of comes up and then falls over and lays on top of the blueberries, and you can see the seed heads there. Like I say, very, very different looking from hair fescue, and there's just a little patch of it here, and then here's another patch of it over here to the right. Okay. But it's definitely a grass species to be watching for. And for most of you, it will be a species that you haven't seen before, which is good. But because you may not be familiar with it, you may miss it. So if you see any weird grasses, definitely take a second look at them this year, just in case it happens to be this species. Okay. Back when I worked for Nathan Boyd many years ago, we did do a bit of work with this grass, and you can see a curb and a casseron plot here, and basically across this trial site, anywhere you see blueberries again, that was either curb or casseron that were applied there. Sinbar, option, basically every other herbicide is very weak on this grass, and really curb is the most practical treatment for it. Hey, with sheep's, unless there's if there's any questions on that red fescue, by all means, yell them out. Otherwise, I'll just keep rolling with sheep sorrel here. Just a bit of reminders about what this plant actually is. So remember, it's a creeping perennial, so it will spread by seeds. You can see a little seedling in the bottom, and then you can see an actual perennial plant here with the creeping roots. And then it's from those roots that the shoots arise that we see above ground, which everybody knows what sheep sorrel looks like, because it's basically as common in blueberry fields as the blueberries themselves, to be honest. But when you see it in a field, this is what you're dealing with. And so this here image is, I've just brushed away all the organic layer and some of the soil, and you can see the roots of the sheep sorrel plants here creeping through there, even going right in between the blueberry stems and stuff here. And that's what's below your feet when you have a sheep sorrel problem, is a very, very extensive network of creeping roots. And that's what this plant's coming back from. In addition to being a fairly aggressive emerger from seed as well, which just compounds the problem even further. Okay. Now, just a quick review of how this weed grows in blueberry fields. It basically never stops growing, but I like to think of the plant. With sheep sorrel start in the fall of the crop year, because after you mow the field, you're going to be able to see the patches of sheep sorrel very easily, just like moss and hawkweed and other things. Shows up very good at the end of the crop year. All those vegetative plants that you see in the fall of the crop year, they're going to overwinter into the following sprout year. And those ones that were present in the fall of the crop year, they're the ones that will bolt and flower and turn your field red in the spring of the sprout year, because this plant is a bit like fescue actually. So all these little green sheep sorrel shoots, they have to go through a vernalization period to be able to bolt and flower. And so they'll build up throughout the crop year. You have them all vegetative at the end of the crop year, and then they overwinter and turn your sprout year field red. And then while those overwintering ones are flowering and setting seed and dying, more vegetative plants are going to emerge from the root system as well as from seed, and they're just going to keep coming the whole sprout year well into the fall. And then once the blueberries start to lose their leaves, you'll see the sheep sorrel hiding underneath the blueberries. Okay, and one of the problems with sheep sorrel, and this is just going to get progressively worse, unfortunately, is it's able to grow at very low temperatures. So this is some old data that I did quite a few years ago, but looking at sprouting of sheep sorrel root fragments at low temperatures, and you can see even down to 1 degree Celsius, these root fragments were actually sprouting. It's a low number, but they're actually physiologically active and sprouting. And this was done as a linear regression. And this number here is where this line crosses the x-axis, and that's the intercept, and that's theoretically the base temperature for sprouting of sheep sorrel roots. And you'll notice that it's negative, which means this plant potentially grows even when the temperature is below 0. And so it's loving the weather that we get now, because sheep sorrel can grow well into the fall under normal conditions. Now that the fall seems to be very warm and seems to last forever, weeds like sheep sorrel are growing and continuing to grow well into December. And I would argue this winter, I would say, except for that last cold snap we had and the weather we've got now, that sheep sorrel has likely been growing all the way up until basically almost February this year, which is why it's getting to be such a problem in crop year fields, because at the end of the sprout, it just never stops growing going into the crop year. Then they're going to overwinter again, sprout and turn the field red, and so on. Okay. Okay, so that's kind of why sheep sorrel really seems to do well in blueberry fields. And when it comes to controlling it, there's not really much new this year. It's basically Spartan is what I'm continuing to recommend. We are working on some fall sprout year stuff, because this is a real big limitation for sheep sorrel right now, because once it grows out of any injury in the sprout year, if it starts to recover, it's producing these vegetative shoots very, very late into the fall of the sprout year. And it's becoming a real big problem. Like last year in particular, a lot of crop year fields were pretty much red with sheep sorrel, when it really didn't seem to be that big of a problem in the sprout year field. And that's likely because it recovered from herbicide injury and then just grew and grew and grew well into the fall. And once you get to the crop year, unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about it, right? So we are working on that, but for now, I would just continue to try Spartan on it if you have any issues. In terms of the timing, if you're coming into a sprout year, then obviously you have no choice. You can only apply it in this coming spring. But if you're going into a crop field and you know that there's going to be some sheep sorrel, when it comes to using the fall treatment, I think that's a good timing. But I just wanted to remind you that if you apply Spartan on sheep sorrel in the fall, I don't have any graphs to show here or anything, but if you apply Spartan on sheep sorrel in the fall, you actually will kill a lot of the plants that are there. But the following sprout year, you'll get millions of new plants coming up from the seed bank, and the field will become a mess again very quickly. If you wait and apply the herbicide in the spring, you'll kill the plants that are there, but also kill many of those seedlings. And that's why I recommend the spring timing most of the time, because it's simply better, gives you better results. But if you've got a crop year field that has a patch of sheep sorrel here, a patch of sheep sorrel there, little bits of it scattered throughout the field, the fall timing would actually be pretty good if you have a situation where the sheep sorrel population is sort of low to moderate, because it's way more flexible for you as a grower. You don't have to worry about crop injury or anything. And as long as the sheep sorrel problem is not too bad, the fall timing can probably work pretty good for you. But if it's a significant sheep sorrel problem, you're going to get way more value from the application if you do it in the spring. Okay. Okay, and right now, the main goal with Spartan is we're trying to come up with tank mixes to improve control and also help manage resistance with that herbicide. And the main products I've been looking at tank mixing with Spartan are ones that are going to give you residual control or stick around in the soil long enough to provide residual control of any seedlings that start to come up after the Spartan wears off. Okay, so this was a trial that was done in Collingwood last year. You can see in spring the density of the sheep sorrel that was there. And long story short, all the tank mixes were useless. None of them actually killed the sheep sorrel. And then when we put them in with the Spartan, there was no value to it statistically. The Spartan alone was just as good as having the tank mixes in there. Okay, now I'm going to backtrack for a minute. I used the word useless there. I didn't mean to say that. Because last year, if you remember, obviously last year's spring was very dry, and there were hardly any seedlings coming up in the plots. And so there was nothing for the tank mix partners to do because there were no seedlings for them to kill. Okay, and so I'm going to repeat this work this coming summer. And I think as we do this work across more years, I think we'll see that things like Authority and potentially Allion and even Velpar, when it comes to getting the seedlings, I think we'll find a lot of utility from these when they're given weather conditions and seedling pressures that will give them an opportunity to actually perform. But last year just wasn't the year for it. Okay. I don't know if there's any questions on sheep sorrel or not, or. Okay. Now, goldenrod, I kind of hemmed and hawed, but my basic stance is if something works, and it's not off label, then to hell with it. And so I'm kind of recommending that if you really are fighting with Canada goldenrod or narrow leaf goldenrod, then you can consider the 2 half rates that we've been looking at recently. Now, you can't do 2 half rates of Callisto and you can't do 2 half rates of Mester, but when I looked at the labels, I didn't see anything on there that precludes you or prevents you from doing a half rate of Callisto in the spring and then following that up with a half rate of Mester 2 weeks later. If there is something on there, then I apologize if I missed it. But as far as I can tell, I think this is a legitimate use of these 2 products. And what I would recommend if you're interested in this is apply the first application, and the products here are interchangeable. So you could do 150 mils of Mester first, followed by 150 mils of Callisto. It doesn't matter which one you use first. The key thing is when you apply the first one, make sure the goldenrod is up and growing, but not much bigger than 20 centimeters. Okay, so I know we used to say 30 centimeters in the past, but generally once the goldenrod shoots are up, once the tallest ones get to about 20, maybe 25 centimeters in height, that's when you want to get the first application on for this. Don't let them go much further than that. And if you do track degree days, about 90% of the goldenrod is out of the ground at around 400 degree days. And so that in the plot work, that's the timing that I try to use, is around 400 growing degree days with a T base of 0 to do the first Callisto application with this work, is what I try to do. And usually the shoot height's around 20 centimeters at that time. Okay. Hey, so I showed some data on this in the fall. It's just with 2 applications of Callisto, but they're identical. Mester and Callisto, as far as I can tell, they're identical products. There's no reason to expect any differences in efficacy across them. And so you can see the different combinations of Callisto rates here. So 0, half is 150, full rate is 300 here. That's mils per hectare. I should have put the units in there. But these are averaged across a couple sites up in the Collingwood area. You can see the spray dates on there. And then this is the starting density in the spring, around 50 goldenrod shoots per square meter. And then just going right to the end of the summer, this is the density in the plots. And you can see the single Callisto application at full rate actually didn't do too bad in this trial. And so again, if you're doing 1 Callisto application, try to get that out by about 400 degree days, because it does seem to be like a pretty good timing for the single application of the goldenrod or the Callisto, sorry. But if you look by the end of the summer, the plots where we had the 2 applications of Callisto, both the 2 half rates as well as the other combinations, they're empty. There's no goldenrod in them, and this is sequential half rate in August compared to sequential full rate in August. And obviously we got a little grass problem going on here, but I have some thoughts on dealing with that. But you don't see any goldenrod there, right? And this is what the control plot looked like. It was almost like you were wading through the jungle with a rifle or something, trying to find the plots and do the counts here in this trial, because it was very, very heavy goldenrod at this site. But the treatment obviously worked very, very well. Okay, and then this is what regrew in the crop year last summer. So you can see there's a pretty decent carryover effect from all the Callisto applications, to be honest, but particularly the sequential ones here, like the half rate one, and then where you had the full rate out early. So I do think that this sequential half rate approach gives you good sprout year control, but also does seem to give you some carryover into the crop year in terms of having very little regrowth from the goldenrod in the following year as well. Okay, and this is just some data from sprout year last year of one of the new sites that I put out, and so you can see around 60 shoots per square meter. And again, by the end of the sprout year, it's the same thing that we were seeing the year before. The ones where you got the 2 Callisto applications, including the 2 half rates, is where you're seeing the most reduction in the goldenrod. Okay, so it's this use pattern right here, the 2 half rates, is starting to show some consistency over years and sites, which is a good indicator that it's something that may potentially be useful to you guys to try. Okay. And I like this approach, and I hope that it's something that we're able to pursue further going forward, because this gives you awesome opportunities for tank mixes. And even though we may not be allowed to technically use any of them, you have some flexibility here that can really maximize weed control in this crop. So if you look at the first application here, depending on how early you are, you could potentially have Velpar in with it. But a more logical mix with that first application is going to be something like Lawn Trail or Pyralid. I've had those products out on goldenrod quite a bit. And if you look at the plot picture to the right, that's a Lawn Trail plot next to a control plot there. And Lawn Trail doesn't kill the goldenrod, but it twists it up pretty good and stunts it quite significantly. And in some tank mixes that I've had with it with Callisto, it does seem to be pretty decent. And so I do think that that first application, if you had Lawn Trail or Pyralid in there, you're going to get some extra goldenrod control. And then, as most folks are aware at this point, if you have a hawkweed problem, the Lawn Trail or the Pyralid's going to help you with that as well as a variety of other potential broadleaf plants. A little bit of suppression on sheep sorrel or whatever as well. And then when you come around to the second application, you're going to definitely need some grass control in there. And so based on what's available this year, you could consider option or venture at that point, or maybe next year you could try Arrow or Select or something there as well. But I think this use pattern, even though it means another pass across the field, it does seem to be improving weed control. And I really think it gives you some really good opportunities to get a lot of weed control out of a program that would be built around something like Callisto. Okay, and then if you do have a goldenrod problem, please don't ignore the possibility for giving it a good smack in the fall. Both fall sprout year and fall crop year are good times to get in with some products to deal with goldenrod, whether it be a weed wiper with glyphosate, or I have looked at post-harvest applications of glyphosate. Banville is what I use, but it's called Ingenia now, and Chikara, and all of these have potential to deal with Roundup or with goldenrod, in the fall. So just for example, this is an image of a sprout year field in September with goldenrod in it. If you were looking at a sprout year field that looked like this, my advice would be don't let your first thought be that you need Callisto next year. Fire up the weed wiper, because even if you only get half of it, glyphosate or something at this time of year on a weed like goldenrod is extremely effective on these weeds at that time. And it will be beneficial even if it doesn't kill all of it. And then after harvest, I've noticed that this is a field that's been picked, and you'll see some of the goldenrod's been run over and flattened, obviously, but there's still a fair amount of it that's still upright and could be treated with a herbicide. And we have done some post-harvest weed control trials with goldenrod, and these are the products that we've looked at for that. So Spartan, Altum, Callisto, Lawn Trail, Chikara, Banville, and then we did a weed wiper with glyphosate. And these are the sites that we went into. And all of these sites were sites that were picked with a machine harvester by the grower before we went in and put the plots in to do the work. And this was the starting density of the goldenrod in October when we applied the treatments. And then you go fast forward to the following June, and you can see where the Banville was in particular, as well as where the weed wiper was. I mean, you got hardly anything coming back compared to the control there, right? The Chikara is not bad. I think there's potential for it, but certainly statistically, Banville or Ingenia and the weed wiper were the ticket there. So, if the goldenrod's upright in the fall and it's green and happy looking, then that's a golden opportunity for you to go in there and apply some basic treatments that can potentially improve control of that weed, especially when you start stringing that together with the Callisto use in the sprout year. And then depending on the year and where the processors stand, you always have the potential to use Callisto or Mester in the spring of the crop year there as well. And so, if you are dealing with Canada goldenrod, or more likely narrowleaf goldenrod, I do think if you start putting together a program, something like you see on the screen here, and take advantage of all these opportunities and timings, I really think you can wear that wheat down in a fairly timely manner if you take advantage of all those opportunities where you can potentially hit it. Okay. Now, if you happen to have one of these types of goldenrod, then I don't know what the hell to tell you, because I can't figure out anything that kills these ones. So this is the late goldenrod or downy goldenrod. These ones, these types of goldenrods, these weird ones that are different looking, that pop up from rosettes and stuff, these are very, very, very hard to control because Callisto is very weak on them. And even though they grow upright, these are bolting stems coming from a rosette, and wiping glyphosate and stuff on those is not going to have a big overall effect on the actual established perennial plant, because in plants that do this bolting thing, this is just like what wild carrot would do, you don't get a lot of translocation into the below ground plant parts from these bolting stems. They're bolting because they're focused purely on flowering and seed production. That's what they're existing to do. And so it makes these plants really hard to deal with. Okay, but Hugh and I, Hugh Liu at Perennia, we did beat a treatment list into place, and him and his friend Shane at Perennia did put out a trial a couple years ago in a field like this. So this was the field that they went in, and I just wanted to include this picture because you can see all this downy goldenrod that's bolted, but you can also see all of the green rosettes that have not bolted, though those would be rosettes that just formed this growing season here. And that's what you're going to have to kill with these types of goldenrods in order to get them. The ones that are bolting and flowering are beyond anything that you can do in my mind. It's you have to hit these rosettes to take out these plants. And that's what the challenge is, because there's no way in hell that there's going to be a herbicide that will kill these rosettes and these goldenrods that doesn't also kill or damage the blueberries. And that's where the challenge is going to be with these things. So we did look at these products here, and Hugh did the plot setup and the spraying. So I just want to acknowledge that he did most of the legwork on this. But these were the products that were used. This is the rosette density in the fall of 2020. The herbicides were applied on November 5th. And then this is the density in the following spring. And so you can see that the Banville was kind of standing out as the best, at least initially. But Hugh also mentioned that Roundup and Chikara did look good visually, like visual injury was high on the goldenrod, and Hugh thought Chikara, Roundup, and Banville looked like the three most promising products. By the end of the summer, the plants had more or less recovered or whatever from it. So we still got a long ways to go with dealing with these goldenrod species. But unfortunately, for the moment, there's really no low-hanging fruit with these ones in terms of easy treatments that you can implement. It's really boom on and boom off in the bare spots, if that's where it is, with something like glyphosate or with Banville or Ingenia, or maybe try Chikara, or broadcast spraying some of those treatments if you can avoid hitting the blueberries or something. So still need to do a lot of work with those types of goldenrods. Really is just kind of getting started. But if you are dealing with them, I do sympathize with you, because I can imagine how difficult they are to deal with. But they're just a species that's not going to have an easy solution, at least not right now. Okay, and then I just wanted to finish up just reminding a couple of things about cow wheat. And so this is definitely a weed that many people are watching. A grad student, Vanessa DeVoe, some of you might know her because she's pretty relentless in terms of getting a hold of you guys and trying to find field sites and stuff. She's been doing a lot of good work trying to understand this plant better. And so she is getting some seedling emergence data. So that picture there, the inset, is the little seedlings of this plant. And I guess backtrack, the reason that I'm talking about cow wheat in the first place is, if you aren't aware, cow wheat's a hemiparasite that needs to parasitize other plants to be able to get some of the resources it needs to be able to flower and set seeds. And one of the other species that it can potentially parasitize is blueberries. And that's why we're worried about it, because it's potentially, you fertilize, cow wheat taps into the blueberry plant and takes your fertilizer, directly from inside the blueberries is what I'm saying here, or at least some of it. And so that's why we're a bit concerned about this plant and trying to understand it better. But what I want to show with this graph is that 80% of the cowweed seedlings, and we're seeing this across multiple sites now. I just haven't had a chance to combine the data or whatever, but about 80% of the seedlings are out of the ground sometime in mid to late May. It's a very early riser in blueberry fields. And so it's emerging throughout April and throughout May. And in a sprout year, that's exactly when you are applying many of the sprout year herbicides that are available to you. And the good news is most of them kill cowweed. And so this is some data from last year. This was the starting density across a couple of sites. You'll see it is a little bit all over the place, but where it was such a dry year last year, cowweed is an annual coming from seed. So if it's a dry year, those types of weeds, their density is generally naturally low because no water, no seed germination. But then by the end of the summer, you can see in the control plot and the pyralid plot, you can see that there was a fair amount of cowweed in it, but wherever we applied Velpar, Sinbar, Authority, Allion, Chiquera, Spartan, Steadfast, Option, or Callisto, you can see that the cowweed was more or less controlled relative to the non-treated control there. Okay, everything was applied pre-emergence except for Option and Callisto, and so the May 13th herbicide applications here, those were Velpar, Sinbar, Authority, Allion, Chiquera, Spartan, and Steadfast, as well as the Pyralid. And then the June 3rd application, that was Option and Callisto. Hey, and so I think, you know, cowweed, there's a lot of it around, but it is sensitive to most of the herbicides that you guys are using. And particularly if we have a few cycles in a row where you're allowed to use Callisto in the crop year, I think then you will start to see much less of this weed around as people maybe get some more Velpar out more than they have been in the past. And then if you're using Callisto in the crop year as well, I think that's going to start to whittle this plant down a little bit. I've been talking for a while, Terry. I was just going to mention if you have hawkweed, these are some plots that Gavin had in New Brunswick there. Just reminding you that Lontrell or Pyralid are the treatments for that. And the plots where you don't see any cowweed, that was either Lontrell or Sinbar plus Lontrell is what was used there. And then if you got dog bane, I wish you the best of luck. But basically, Hugh can pipe in on this. We tried a lot of stuff in Hugh's Masters. Everything that you can shoot out of a boom and hit the dog bane and the blueberries, none of that stuff works as the bottom line. And we continue to find that just some grunt work with either Ingenia or Banville. Garlon is very good on it, and glyphosate continues to be what tends to get it. And then just to finish up, I do want to encourage everyone to continue to watch out for glossy buckthorn. I've been talking with Hugh, and it sounds like some folks are considering resting some fields again. And those are the types of situations where this shrub will potentially get into a blueberry situation. That's what it looks like there, the shiny ovate leaves. Very, very attractive, very interesting looking flower, to be honest, very distinct. And then those are the fruit there. The problem with buckthorn is it's bird dispersed. So birds eat the fruit and then crap the seeds out all over the place. And this stuff spreading like wildfire throughout the province. And I just wanted to show you this because this is the size of that these plants can get in a typical blueberry cycle. So this is a crop year field. So obviously this would have been mowed the previous year. So this tree wouldn't have been there, and it achieved all of that growth within a 2-year production cycle. So you can just imagine if you've got a fair amount of it, you know, good luck picking through it, right? And so it has the potential to be a very aggressive and very problematic weed in blueberries. So if you see any tree-like weeds sticking up in your crop year fields, have a close look at them. And if it's buckthorn, I really do strongly advise you to either spot treat it or just with a pair of loppers, cut the shoots down and treat the stump with Garlon or something like that, because this is a pretty bad plant to have in a cropping system like blueberries. Hey, so just thank everybody who's helped pay the bills, and then also the growers that often initially say no when I call, but if I bother them enough, they eventually buckle and let me do the plot work. So I do appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you very much, Scott. That's much appreciated. There is a few questions in the chat box. You kind of answered it, but may not hurt to just go back, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you want me to check them or?
No, I'm just bringing them back up here.
Yeah, and I'll start my video here now as well, since it's...
So Jeff asked the question, so who do we lobby, PMRA, with regards to these potential new tank mixing rules coming down the pipeline?
So for that, I think maybe Gavin Lunn wants, because he is a product rep, and if there's any others on the line, but my feeling is it's having conversations with those types of folks that are our direct link with companies like Adama or BASF, or so things like, think like Graham Kempton locally, Eric Richter, Blair Fraser, those types of fellows, Gavin, and just chatting with them to see if it's something that we need to be worried about with their products, or whether or not they're considering any language changes on their labels to provide any flexibility, or whether or not they're willing to at least verbally support the use of a particular tank mix, even if it's not on the label. Okay? Because I think that's been the basis for the use of Callisto and Venture for many years. I think now, Terry, has simply been a verbal okay from Syngenta, is my understanding, because it's not on the label. It's off label when you look at the product labels, but we've been supported in that use, I believe, just verbally from the company over the years. So.
Okay. And then again, another question was, can we spray Spartan both after crop and again in the sprout year? And you kind of more or less discussed that as well, but may not hurt just to reaffirm.
I don't know. I should know that question. I don't think we can. I think it's once per cycle, once per production cycle. And so, yeah, the way I look at it is you could do it you could apply it in the spring, and then again after you mow, because that's starting the second cycle. But if you spray it in the fall after mowing, and then again in the spring, that's within the same cycle. And that's borderline semantics there, but I'm pretty sure the label statement is one application per cropping cycle with that product, but I'd have to double check the label there, Terry.
Yeah, no, actually I thought that's what you said earlier, but maybe I was just dreaming that.
You're spacing out on me.
Yeah. Is there any other questions for Scott while we got him here? Can't let him off this easy.
I might have to take a year off, Terry. Let some questions
Can I
build
ask
up.
you a question?
Yeah.
On your second application of Callisto on the 150, and you use option, do you need to use UAN as well?
If you had option in with it, yes. Yeah, I would. Yeah. Now there is various debate around the requirement for that, like when you're tank mixing, the need for each individual adjuvant, Chris, but unless a product rep said that the tank mix with Callisto would remove the need for the UAN, I would still use the UAN as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. I'll check up with the rep in March.
Yeah.
Another question came up in the chat box. Spartan herbicide at, oh, maybe I'm not reading this right. Let me. Okay. Gavin Lunn put down fall application for bunchberry control Spartan at 40 grams per hectare with Agrol at 2%.
Yeah. Yeah, I just opened up the chat as well there, Terry, to try to help you out here.
I just put that in there, Terry. It says on there, do not apply more than once in a crop cycle.
Yep. No, that's perfect.
I see there's one there about glossy buckthorn. Glyphosate does, now if it's wiped on, I'm gonna say no, depending on how much coverage you get though. So I think as long as, if you wipe glyphosate on it, as long as you got as much of the tree or the shrub covered as possible, I think yes. But if you only skim the top of it, then I would say no. And so wiping, yes, as long as you can get pretty good coverage of the shrub there. Yeah. Just keep an eye out for that one, because it's surprising how much of it there is around. And I do think it's definitely a species that, like all the bad weeds, even fescue one day was just a little bit here and there. Right now, the goddamn stuff's everywhere. And buckthorn, just my gut feeling is it's another species that could do that in 10 years or something like that. So.
So any other questions among the audience? Just remember to mute yourself and then ask away. Scott's threatening to take a year off, so. Sandra, Chloe, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I don't.
Well, like I mentioned, Terry, I mean, we're kind of in a holding pattern here, and so really it's business as usual to some extent when it comes to the weed control this year. And I think most of the growers are in pretty good spot in terms of knowing what to use and when.
I don't know if you saw that comment from Jeff or not.
I'll do what I can. I don't want to solve them all and won't have any work to do. Get fired.
That won't be a problem.
No, I don't think solving weed problems is anything that's going to run dry anytime soon, especially in blueberries. But we'll keep better.
Last call.
And I don't know how to deal with the cat on the keyboard there. It's outside of my expertise. With my cat, I have the same problem.
Well, barring no more questions, then I certainly want to thank you, Scott, for your presentation. And for anyone that's a CCA, Chloe's going to put up their QR code for that.
Yes, I'm just gonna.
And then we remind everybody, tomorrow night we continue with Blair Fraser, Hugh Liu, and Lise LeBlanc speaking. And everything begins at 6 o'clock again. So please make sure to join us. And thank you everybody for your time tonight.
All right, so for anyone who is a CCA, I have the QR code up there now so you can scan it. And then for everyone who is wanting their pesticide points, you'll receive an email shortly after we end the session. And basically you just have to click the link in the email, fill out all the information. It's very similar to what you filled out for the registration. So your name, address and all that kind of stuff. And we just use that as a cross-reference with your attendance. And then you'll receive a receipt email back pretty much instantly. So, yeah.
So we'll leave the QR code up for a little bit longer, but once again, thanks to everybody in attendance, and we look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Great presentation, Scott.